All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to explore the absolutely awe-inspiring engineering that quite literally keeps an entire nation from sinking beneath the waves. We're looking at the Netherlands today, a country that has engineered its very survival against the relentless force of the North Sea.
So picture this for a second. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the ocean right outside your window is actually higher than your entire city. And not because the sea suddenly rose overnight, but because your city was built in a hole. Well, in the Netherlands, this isn't science fiction, it's just an everyday geographic reality. In fact, if you travel there, you might witness something that genuinely bends the mind. Massive cargo ships legally having the right of way while sailing on canals that sit visibly higher than the highways where cars are driving underneath. Just take a look at this stark number, 26%. More than a quarter of the Netherlands currently sits below mean sea level. And we aren't just talking about empty swamps here. Some of the country's most densely populated and economically vital areas are located right in these low-lying zones. We're talking about over 17 million people thriving in a country where, honestly, a significant portion should technically be underwater right now. Section 1, a country below sea level. So, to really understand how they pull this off, we have to look at the history. For centuries, the Dutch have lived with an uncomfortable fact. The water is always there. The North Sea basically acts like a giant funnel, driving massive storms directly into the Dutch coastline. And the threat isn't just coming from the sea either. It's from the rivers flowing toward it. It creates this endless, daily battle against nature just to maintain the very ground they stand on. Which leads us right into Section 2, creating land from water. This is where the Dutch story gets truly fascinating. You see, they decided early on not just to block the sea, but to actively reach into it and reclaim the land beneath it. They didn't just want to stop the water, they wanted the ground underneath for their growing population. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive shift in their engineering philosophy. The old mindset, it was purely defensive, just building dikes to keep the sea out. But the new mindset was entirely offensive. Through the famous Zuiderzee works, they isolated a massive sea inlet, pumped all the water out, and quite literally pulled about 165,000 hectares of new land right out of the water. Look at these reclaimed lands, places like Wieringermeer, Noordoostpolder, and the massive Flevoland province. The engineers didn't just drain the water and hope for the best. No, they meticulously planned the roads, the farms, the towns, and the drainage systems before the land even existed. This is a real hallmark of Dutch engineering. The landscape itself becomes the infrastructure. I mean, they designed an entire province from scratch, right on the bottom of what used to be the sea. Section 3, the 1953 North Sea flood. But, as with many great human achievements, this incredible mastery over water was born out of profound tragedy. We have to shift our focus to the night of January 31, 1953. A massive storm formed south of Iceland and headed directly for that North Sea funnel. In the middle of the night, the dikes finally broke. The result was absolutely devastating. 1,836 people lost their lives. Entire villages were fast asleep when the freezing water rushed in, and tragically, many of them never woke up. It remains the worst storm surge in the country's modern history. To really grasp this, think about the sheer, unimaginable scale of the disaster. 150,000 hectares of land completely vanished underwater in a single night. 43,000 houses were heavily damaged or destroyed, and 200,000 animals drowned. On the island of Gori Overflakkee, in just one single village, Oudetong, 305 sleeping residents were lost. This national trauma forced politicians and everyday citizens alike to make a solemn vow: never again. They would no longer just react to the sea. They were going to completely redesign their coastline. Section 4, the mighty Delta Works. This absolute resolve birthed the Delta Works. Championed by a visionary engineer named Johan van Veen, who, by the way, had actually been warning everyone about the poor state of the dikes long before the flood hit, this became one of the most ambitious flood defense programs ever undertaken in human history. It really served as the ultimate catalyst for modern Dutch water management. So what is the Delta Works? Well, it consists of 13 major engineering projects. We're talking about a colossal, interconnected system of dams, sluices, locks, and storm surge barriers. By closing off all the jagged estuaries, they essentially ironed out the map. They reduced a jagged 700-kilometer coastline down to a smooth, manageable 80 kilometers, which drastically reduced the number of dikes they actually had to maintain.
As you can see from this timeline, this wasn't some quick overnight fix. This was 4 decades of relentless, highly advanced engineering. They started immediately after the 1953 disaster, getting the Hollandsche IJsselkering storm surge barrier operational by 1958. And they kept going, all the way to 1997 with the completion of the monumental Maeslant. Every single project over those 40 years taught the Dutch engineers something entirely new about living with water. And this brings us to a massive evolution in their thinking. Originally, the plan was simple, just seal off all the estuaries completely. But environmentalists and fishermen pushed back. They realized that completely closing the Eastern Scheldt would destroy its rich, saltwater ecosystem of oysters, birds, and fish. So the philosophy shifted away from keep the sea out at all costs to exactly what you see here, control when the sea comes in. The result of that shift is the true crown jewel of the Delta Works, the Oosterscheldekering, or Eastern Scheldt Barrier. This thing is wild. It's 9 kilometers long and features 62 colossal steel gates suspended between massive concrete piers. Most of the time, these gates are left wide open, letting the tides flow in and out naturally so the marine environment can thrive. But if a dangerous storm threatens, they can slam shut, offering protection against a flood so severe it's statistically only expected once in 4,000 years.
Section 5. Smart barriers and rubber walls. As technology advanced, the structures of the Delta Works started to look less like traditional concrete dams and a whole lot more like giant automated robots defending the coast. Take the Maeslant Barrier, for instance, which was built to protect the vital port of Rotterdam. It features 2 enormous steel gates, each 210 meters wide. They pivot on these massive 10-meter ball and socket joints, supporting gigantic steel arms that weigh 6,800 tons each. And here's the crazy part. Nobody drives these arms. Nobody sits in a booth and presses a button. The barrier is hooked up to a computer system that constantly reads weather and sea level data. It's fully automatic. When needed, the gates swing out, fill with water, and sink to the seabed to lock the ocean out completely. But they don't just rely on steel and concrete. To protect against water pushback from the IJsselmeer, they built the Ramspolkering. Instead of heavy metal gates, it's a giant inflatable rubber wall resting completely unseen on the riverbed. When dangerous conditions arrive, these reinforced rubber bladders inflate with air and water to form a solid barrier 10 meters high and 240 meters long. It is literally the only inflatable storm surge barrier of its kind in the entire world.
Section 6. Embracing river and sea. The work isn't done because the climate is changing. Global sea levels are rising faster than before, potentially up to 1.24 meters by the year 2100 under high-emission scenarios. This means the Dutch now have to prepare their fortresses for a future of even more extreme weather.
A perfect example of this future-proofing is the massive upgrade currently happening to the historic 32-kilometer Afsluitdijk. To make sure it can withstand future superstorms, they are raising the dike by 2 entire meters. They're also reinforcing it with 75,000 specially designed wave-breaking concrete blocks called level blocks, which weigh a staggering 6,500 kilos each. Plus, because more water is flowing into the lake from inland rivers, they're installing massive, low-energy pump stations to drain that excess water back into the Waddenzee faster than ever before.
And look at this community celebrating. They're forming the shape of a fish to highlight the Fish Migration River, a 4-kilometer winding river being built right through the Afsluitdijk to allow fish to freely migrate between salt and freshwater. You see, the Dutch are no longer just fighting nature, they're collaborating with it. Through nature-based strategies like the sand motor, which uses natural currents to rebuild beaches, and the Room for the River initiative, which actually gives rivers expanded floodplains rather than constricting them, they are working alongside the natural flow of water. Which brings us to the profound realization that defines the modern Netherlands. Uncontrolled water, not water itself, is the enemy. The Dutch have learned the hard way that you cannot simply build a wall high enough to ignore nature forever. You have to understand it, manage it, and design your entire world around it. As sea levels continue to rise globally, the question isn't just about the Netherlands anymore. Will the rest of the world learn to engineer our landscapes to live with the water, or will we simply wait for the tide to come in?